Welcome to another episode of Glassix Spotlight, everyone. Today's episode is a special one because we've got Adrian Swinscoe with us. He's not just any expert, he's the guy who's been shaking things up in the customer experience world for over 25 years. Adrian is the voice behind the Punk CX podcast, where he chats with big thinkers about making customer service straightforward and honest. It's all about real talk and real advice that you can actually use. He's also the brains of Punk XL, where he looks at the big picture of customer experience. It's about leading the way in making sure customers and teams are happy from the ground up. And if you're looking for some straight shooting insights on customer experience, Adrian's book, Punk CX, is the ticket. It's about cutting through the usual noise and getting down to what really works. Adrian doesn't just talk the talk. He's a Forbes contributor and a regular speaker who knows his stuff. So if you want to learn how to make your customers love what you do, Adrian's got some stories and tips you'll want to hear. Adrian, it's great to have you here on Glassix Spotlight.
Ran, what an intro. Crumbs, no pressure then for me to live up to that intro. But I'll try my best. But thank you for inviting me onto the Glassix podcast. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. So, Adrian, before we jump right in, could you please share more about Punk XL and what you've been up to recently? Is there like anything worth sharing in this?
I mean, the thing I would say is that so the Punk CX idea, I mean, it's been around for me, I guess personally, for a few years now. Like Punk CX, the book came out back in 2019, and the actual idea kind of originated back in 2000, late 2017. So it's part of the backstory to it, and the idea really is that the hypothesis behind the whole thing is that the whole customer experience space is exhibiting some of the same characteristics as the progressive rock space exhibited in the back in the 1970s. Anybody knows anything about rock music genres and stuff? The progressive rock was, whilst it was popular, it was also accused of being self-indulgent, overly elaborate, and sort of more interested in itself than it was in its fans. And punk exploded out the back of that with its DIY, democratic, back to basics, all heart and emotion and impact sort of approach. And it made me think that at the time I thought, well, actually, the experience space is exhibiting some of the same characteristics. I mean, despite the fact there's all this activity and enthusiasm and investment in the space, we're not really seeing this massive improvement or big improvement in some of the outcomes, like customer outcomes or employee outcomes and so on and so forth. And in many ways, the industry is becoming more interested in itself than actually its constituents, i.e. its customers. And so the Punk CX thing is about shaking that tree and trying to say, come on, folks, let's pull your socks up, let's do better work. And Punk XL was a development on from that, which said, well, look, it's not sufficient to just talk about customer experience in isolation. We have to think more holistically. And we have to take into account, employee experience and agent experience and stakeholder experience and all these different things. If we were to create an organization that is going to be fit and vibrant on all fronts to produce the trifecta of outcomes, the trifecta of improvement in outcomes that are, i.e., customer outcomes, employee outcomes, and business outcomes. That's kind of what we're really aiming for, an improvement in all three metrics at the same time. And so the Punk XL is a challenge to people to think more holistically about things and to think about what it means to lead in the experience sort of space. And so, is there anything kind of new in, to answer your original question, anything new that I'm focusing on? Well, not really, because I think it's an ongoing campaign of agitation, if you like, for better outcomes across the piece.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Adrian, today's episode to our listeners that want to know called The Art of Memorable Service, a conversation with Adrian Swinscoe. And we'll jump right in. And Adrian, I would love to hear your thoughts. I mean, throughout your impressive career, what shifts have you noticed in customer engagement and how this transformed the way businesses connect with their clientele?
Well, So I think that there's I'm not sure there's been some massive shifts. I mean, I think there's probably been some massive shifts in customer behavior, and also, in the last few years, particularly around the time of the pandemic, there's been some massive shifts in how organizations have chosen to respond to their clients. But it reminds you, your question reminds me of a time when I was at this event in Barcelona, and I was asked a question about what I expected to see in 5 years' time. And I replied to the question. I said, look, and I had a bit of a travel epic getting to the conference, and it was like that I was on stage like the first thing in the morning, and so I was slightly sleep addled at the time. So I replied, in 5 years' time, I think we'll be excited about the possibilities that the future holds, but we will be frustrated at the progress that we've made. And what I mean by that is that we talk about shifts in customer engagement. I think there's a huge amount of potential and possibility with technology and all these different kind of things, and it's fast changing. But I don't think we've done enough to capitalize on that and the promise of it all. Let me give you an example. We've been talking about the importance of offering an omni-channel experience to our customers for 10, maybe more years now. And recently there was a stat that came out of a piece of global research that came out of Deloitte that was into the contact center space. And they found that only 7% of global contact leaders have been able to integrate all of the channels in together, i.e., that they've achieved that omni-channel experience. Only 7%. I've checked that with other people from the industry, and they suggest that that number is possibly quite generous. And so that's what I mean. It's like there's a potential for shift. But I think the shift, we're kidding ourselves if we think that actually real shifts have taken place in the whole service and experience space. I think there's so much more that can be done to deliver the service that we want to, and I feel like if we were to give ourselves a report card from like a school report card, I think we would be potentially barely passing in large part right now.
To your point, Adrian, do you think it's because we're not there as human being, or technology is not there yet?
No, I mean, I think I went to another event earlier this year, and I was talking to lots of people. It was all very exciting. It was a technology event, and I was speaking to lots of different people, and the potential for the technology, I think, is exciting, and it's endless. And but I also think the implementation thereof of the technology, I think, is reasonably well understood. I think one of the biggest challenges is that, and that I've referred to it as the underlying hum that was coming out of this event, was that actually it's the transforming of our own businesses. It was where the problem lies. And so actually we as human beings are the ones that really need to change in order to harness this potential. And that is going to require us to, I guess, unlearn and maybe relearn some new ways of doing things to allow us to build better habits, new habits, kind of different behaviors in order to produce these kind of better outcomes. And so I think if there's a sticking point in all of this, it's probably us as human beings.
Right. So it's more than adoption. It's more than a mindset shift.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is there. We have to do the hard work of scrutinizing ourselves and what we do and how we currently work and operate and things. But I also think it's probably more than that. Because I actually don't think that there are many organizations that really have a clear and compelling an inclusive vision of what it is they want to try and achieve, or what they want to actually deliver to their customers. And what I mean by that is that most people will probably dispute that and say, "Oh, yes, we have a vision. It's X or Y." But when you scrutinize that, then I think what you'll probably largely find is that these vision statements are just that. They're statements. They're probably a random assemblage of a bunch of different buzzwords that put together that all sound broadly the same, i.e., it's seamless, AI enabled, digital, kind of blah, 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 blah.
Number one, you forgot number one.
Which is, oh, number one, as in the leading sort of thing. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And but I actually think that what they haven't done is they haven't gone to the next level, to that, and to actually interrogate. Okay, that's fair enough, but then what does that mean for everybody in our organization? And so they better understand what they need to do and what role they play in the delivery of this. And I don't think I don't think we go to that that level, and therefore we wonder kind of why and how we're not getting the results or having the impact that we desire. And so I think we almost need to do a lot more homework up front, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think you mean like the organization can clearly define KPIs and OKRs and might have a blueprint for that,
Mm-hmm.
but they all kind of live in
Yeah.
silos. They are not connected. There are no feedback loops. There are no cross departmental efforts. I understand.
Mm.
Yes.
So it's a bit like, if I may, Rand, it's a bit like having that story, right? There's an old story that says there was a guy in ancient times was wandering down this road, and he came across this yard that was like a stone yard, and there was three people working away in the stone yard. And so he enters through the gates and he talks to them, and he says, and the first one he says to him, says, "So how do you do? Tell me, what is it that you do?" And the first person said to them, "Well, I turn these big blocks of stones into little blocks of stones." He says, "Okay, thank you very much." And then he says, goes to the second one, he says, "What do you do?" And demonstrably, they're all doing the same thing. But he asked the second person, "What do you do?" And he said, "Look, I am I'm a fine craftsman. I create beautiful stone objects." He's like, "Wow, that's brilliant. I love that. Thank you very much." And then he goes on to the third person, who's again doing the same thing as his other two colleagues, and says, "So what do you do?" And this person turns around to him and says, "I build cathedrals." And the moral of that story is that we can all be specialists. You can all have simplistic views um, of our roles, but the last person understands the role that they're playing in the bigger picture.
I couldn't agree more, and I love the moral of this story. Definitely.
And I don't
Adrian,
think we spend enough time. Sorry, I don't think we'd spend enough time helping people understand how they fit into the big picture.
completely. But the question is again, whose job is that?
Oh, it's leadership.
Yeah. But then within leadership, you have layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not all leaders are created equally. Um, and then I say, okay, is it only about it's going to fall on the customer experience leadership? It's going to fall on customer success leadership? It's going to fall on CEO leadership?
I mean, I would say that it has to start with the CEO. And I think the CEO has to, I mean, so the customer success leadership or the customer experience leadership may be picking up the baton and running, additional implementation. But I think it has to start with the CEO, where the CEO has to almost like show that they're interested in what's going on at all levels, and also that they respect what's going on at all levels, and then they want to see and hear feedback from all levels, because it all matters in building that bigger picture.
Right. So, Adrian, is there a defining moment or strategy in your career that has significantly influenced your philosophy on customer experience? Anything that pops when I ask you that?
Uh well, I go back to the I go back to like a number of years ago, and when I started writing about or investigating what good or great service looks like. And so just before that, I was thinking about, okay, I want to start my own blog and website because I could see the way that I was working independently, and I could see the way the market was developing, and I knew that I had to develop this digital footprint and to establish, I guess, what you would call trust at a distance, allow people to get to know what I think and what I stand for, and and some of the things I'm thinking about. And so I started writing about just general business stuff um, initially, and that got very boring very quickly. And so I figured out I needed to write about something that I actually didn't like or that I cared about. And what I quickly realized is that I don't like bad service, and that doesn't make me different to anybody else. But the thing that really frustrates me is having built some things that had customer and employee value at their heart previously. It always frustrated me that how many organizations often get in the way of their people doing a good job. And so that's the thing that drives me. That's the, if you like, to answer your question, that's the defining moment or flip where I sort of realized that actually I really don't like that, and I think we can do better. And I'm going to start writing about and investigating that with not any particular agenda, other than looking for clues in terms of how we can deliver these better outcomes, how we can make customers' lives better, how we make employees' lives better, and how through that we can actually drive business results. And so that was the kind of, if you like, the not the light bulb moment or anything, but it's just the kind of the shift of focus to drill into this kind of groove and to think about, well, what does that actually mean, and what is it going to take to deliver it?
Right. So it's kind of a loop, right? It starts with the employees or the agents, if you like, and then goes to your customers and then goes back to you. And it's kind of a loop, an infinite loop, um, as I see it. And moreover, I think that what I see firsthand here at Glassix, that, we have a lot of customer data. And some of the things that we often see here is that the smaller organizations are kind of starting to understand that they must act as the giant ones.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be there. They now have the technology that supports them to get them where they want to. But ideally, I think that what you just said, was a few years ago, was only right for large enterprises, while we see a huge shift in this movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the medium size and even the smaller size organizations are starting to get the pace right.
Yeah, I think so, and I think what we also need to recognize is that um, when we have startup organizations, they don't do they don't always do everything in an absolutely fresh and new sort of way. The front end they might be building might be fresh and new, but they might come with a whole bunch of other baggage about how they run their organization, if you understand what I mean.
Right.
And so
Yes.
I think the thing, and this is central to the whole sort of punk approach, is this idea that it's about questioning everything and trying to understand, is that the best way to do things? Just because it's been done like that before and in other places or in the past, is that the best thing to do? The best way to do that? Like, for example, I have a client who for the longest time has been seeking some specific sort of like call analytics and reporting kind of data. And there was a whole bunch of problems which preventing them getting it. And then finally they end up getting some of that data because they wanted to really understand, you know, you know, different performance of different members of their team, and kind of how things were flowing in and out. Just the general cadence of their sort of phone support. But one of the things that they did was,
Yeah.
rather than actually producing a series of dashboards and doing analytics or whatever it might be with that, and then then sharing it with a team, what they ended up doing, which would be a normal way of doing it, I would suggest, is what they ended up doing is they just took that data, the raw data, and just gave it to their team and said, "Oh, we've got this. We just recently got this. We've been looking for this sort of data for ages. You kind of know about this. Let's take a look at it and let me know what you think. Let's kind of have a conversation about it." And what was fascinating about it is a whole series of things that the team members themselves picked up on, because they did their own analysis of the data from their own, because they saw their own data and they were like looking at it going, "Oh my God, that happened. And why did that happen? And oh, this is how this happened. And this is what I need to do differently in order to make that not happen." So I don't know if I'm explaining that particularly well, but I think my point is that rather than actually thinking about, I'm going to take that data and I'm going to produce some analytics on the top of it and then share it, what they did is that they turn around and go, "Well, that was the way that people normally would do it. Why don't I just share the data with the team,
No,
treat them like
it's not going
adults,
to work.
and let them make up their own mind about what could happen, what stood out from them, what that means, what they could could they do different, and what they could do to make things better." And I thought it was a brilliant approach, which is like a non-standard way of doing things.
Wow, I'm very curious about the the results there. I have a very strong marketing ops background, so I know that if you're not pulling actionable insights from data, it's kind of worthless, just having the data.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think
but I love
what
it.
they did is, they rather than them taking the responsibility to pull out the actionable insights, they asked their team to pull out the actionable insights that made sense for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love that. It's a very yeah, I like this approach a lot because I think that the different responses you get eventually will help you as a business to improve
Yeah,
yourselves
absolutely.
and the life of your employees. Absolutely, yeah. So, Adrian, in an industry where burnout can be prevalent, what innovative approaches do you recommend for brands to ensure their customer service agents remain motivated and engaged? I mean, how can we ensure that the median tenure for customer service agents will increase over time?
Um, so I think there's kind of like there's a couple of different things. I think if I go back to some of the thing I said before about the whole omni-channel idea, and how only a small percentage of customer service contact center teams have got all their channels integrated. And what that means, because they haven't done that, what that means is that you're making the work of the agent difficult. And that just becomes an attritional thing over time, right? And because there's other research that showed that asked this from a couple of years ago actually, and the research kind of asked customers, name your top 5 frustrations. And number one, the number one frustration was having to repeat myself to a customer service agent once I've been waiting or got through on the phone, let's say. And then they asked a whole series of agents to list out their top 5 frustrations. And brilliantly, the agent's number one frustration was having to ask customers to repeat themselves. And if you think about that, so it's a frustration for customers, but also a frustration for your agents. Having to do that again and again and again when is in a kind of physically but also emotionally attritional sort of thing. And so if you want to make things easier for your agents and help them stay motivated and engaged, then figure out some of these problems and fix them, and fix them quick. Like, I'll give you an example, which, because a lot of people don't approach this type of thing because they think that it's going to require large amounts of big change. So there's a mobile phone provider here in the UK called EE, and they did a project. It's 2-3 years ago. It's a bit more than that. It's about 4-5 years ago right now. And what they did is they polled both their customers and their agents, their employees, and they asked them. They said, "Tell us all the things that you don't like about our service and experience." So they asked customers, as I said, and they asked agents, and they made a big long list. And then they set about trying to solve all those problems. It's important to note, more than 80% of all the problems that they went to try and solve over like a 2-year period were not IT related. It required no technological change. And all the kind of problems, many of the problems were to do with wording on a website, or to do with not big technological change. Didn't require systemic change. It could be like a digital sort of thing, or around how a form rendered, or how information was processed and collected. So they ended up going through it systematically, blah, 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 eliminating and solving all these different kind of problems over the course of 2 years. The result out of the whole sort of thing is that both their NPS and their ENPS kind of like went up by about 30 or 40 points, over and above all the other kind of like demonstrable commercial benefits that come from that, i.e. reduction in failure demand, reduction in load, time saved, all these different sort of things. And I guess my point with all of that sort of stuff is that if you working hard to make a customer's life easier, and at the same time making that, if you work hard to make a customer's life easier, and at the same time you can make an employee's life easier, then I think you'll end up reaping the benefits, because then the agents then get a chance to not spend so much time on the simple, banal, kind of mundane sort of stuff, but they get more chance to actually focus on the real kind of problems and the relationships, and not having to deal with all the kind of the process missteps, or the kind of the things because the company hasn't been able to get its act together.
Right. I think that blending in generative AI in particular can help both the agent and the customers, touching all the points you just mentioned regarding conversation history not being saved.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I'm getting a bit technical here. So obviously conversation history not being saved, so customers needs to go through the same loop of explaining themselves all over again to the same agent, even if the ticket or the conversation for that matter closed 3 or 4 or 20 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. With the tech that we have today, with the abilities that certain softwares out there in the market have, this experience should no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not even talking about conversation continuity, more talking about how we empower agents here at Glassix with generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few models that we developed recently as part of our AI suite. The first one called auto tagging of conversations. So imagine yourself that the AI can understand from the text within the conversation what is the appropriate tagging. Of course, the tagging should be predefined in advance by the business, but then the AI can auto tag the conversation, therefore conversation not being lost or not mistagged. And that saves a lot of time for both the agents and the other departments within the org. We also do other things such as conversation summary.
Yeah.
So agents agents now can just one click and summarize the entire conversation ticket, even if it happened today or in other days of the week or the month or the year. So that's quite big for them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is just a little bit the tip of the iceberg on how we touch generative AI, how we try to make the agent's life, both the agents and the customers, actually a bit more rapid and convenient, if you like.
Yeah.
But I'll make the shift now, and looking back at your achievements, Adrian, could you share an instance where a customer experience initiative you championed made a significant difference in your company's performance? I mean, what KPIs were measured? What success looked like?
Um, oh, crumbs. I've gone slightly blank. So let me kind of like I'll tell you a story about. It's something I was just speaking to somebody about, and it's not a big thing, but it's like a small thing. But I think it's important, and I wish more people would do it. And it's this idea that often service and support teams in organizations are, I think people respect the work that gets done, but they don't necessarily understand it. They don't understand the scope or the breadth or the depth of the work that they do. And so that can come about because many people will put their contact center, and they might put it in a different place to where their headquarters are. Sometimes it's on a different floor, sometimes in a completely different location altogether. And because, as you said, Ran, that many organizations operate in this very siloed kind of way, so people don't talk to each other, they don't understand the nature of the work that they do. Now, that's just a function of how things are set up, but it's not the fault of somebody who say that works in marketing not knowing about customer service. They might care about what they do, but they just don't know about what they do, and it's not their fault. I think the people that have to take responsibility for that is the people that work in customer service, customer support, customer experience themselves, and they have to get better at telling their story, particularly people in that sort of contact center space that are sometimes not, it's not the most glamorous department in many organizations.
Definitely not.
And, and so I think they need to get better at telling their own story. Um, and I remember advocating for a client to do that. And they were looking at me and they were like going, really? I was like, yeah, no, trust me. It's like, you have to tell the story because people have to understand what you're going to do. Now, they might not do anything with it, but at least you're telling your story. And so they started putting together this monthly update about what they've been working on, what they've been focused on, how things have been going for them. And they started putting it out. And the response to it was phenomenal. Quotes like, oh my God, I didn't know you did that. And oh my God, that's amazing. And the amount of work that you guys do, that's phenomenal. Like, you're the best, etc., etc. But also what happened, more importantly, what happened on the back of it, because they continued to do that and inform people. What happened on the back of it is that they were seen with this increased level of awareness and increased level of respect from around the organization, and they got invited to participate, or they got asked to weigh in on different initiatives that were going on where their colleagues thought they might have a valuable perspective to add. And so what I'd ask people to remember is to remember, if you're working in service and support or help, that you are an important part of the organization. But don't just expect people to understand and value the work that you do. You have to also take responsibility to tell your own story. If you've got something to say, then please say it.
This is such a strong message, and I know it. I try to experience it in all six other SaaS organization I worked for in the past, and I've seen it happening a lot, and I think it's a very powerful message here, for support people to stay resilient, to know how to communicate not only their effort, but I think how to communicate their job, their day to day. They're the ones who are in the forefront,
Mm-hmm.
not other departments. Well, maybe sales are,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I mean, support people, customer service people, right? These are the people that are actually are the backbone of the organizations, like it or not.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the thing. Is like so. Um, I believe that service, help, support, the contact center is this. Is this? Oh, what's the word? It is this body of people and knowledge and insight and data that has so much latent potential that it's not really being used. It's being used, and people are applying technology more from a kind of managing kind of demand perspective, but also kind of like managing quality, particularly if you're in a compliance or driven or a regulated industry. But I also think there's so much um, insight there that can inform what you do going forward, but also inform the whole organization, because you are talking about real time, unfiltered, unstructured, qualitative feedback on a massive scale. And it's gold dust, but many organizations don't plug into it.
Yeah. Adrian, before we wrap up, I have to pick your brain on this one last thing. If you could offer one essential piece of advice for businesses striving to take their customer support from good to great,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be?
I would say I would share like a 3-line thing um, with you. And it's a thing that I've been playing around with. And it says that, we talk about our organizations being, we want it to be more data driven decision making machines, as it were. And I think that's fine. But I'd ask you to consider these 3 different levels. Because I would suggest that data informs us, right? And the next level is that stories move us, but experiences compel us. So, as a leader in a business who values the delivery of great service and a great experience, ask yourself this: at what level are you, as what level is your organization operating at, and what level are you operating at? Are you operating at just the data level? Or are you operating at the data and the story level? Or are you operating at the data and the story and the experience level? And the experience level, of what I mean by that is that how often are you going out and exposing yourself to your customer stories, or listening to customers, or hanging out with customers, or being your own customer, to actually start adding that visceral context to all of the kind of other kind of like hard data um, that you're collecting, because that's the sort of thing where we get emotionally touched and moved, that will allow us then to it will drive the creativity and the insight that we need to make some of the fundamental changes that are going to make that difference in our organizations, in order to providing better value both to our customers, our employees, and also our businesses as a whole.
That's beautiful. Adrian, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. To our listeners, check out Punk CX podcast. Adrian is the real thing. And Punk XL, if you want to read more insights or hear more insights from Adrian. Adrian, thank you so much for coming in.
Ran, it's been an absolute pleasure, and so thank you for inviting me on to have a bit of a rummage around some of this important stuff.
Absolutely.